Hello, everyone out there. We are now live. We got all our technical difficulties worked out, and I hopefully know. Hopefully, you guys know who I am. But if you don't, this is Alexandria RPG Library, and we're a nonprofit library that shares role playing games with as many people as we can. Going to events and teaching people the awesome nature of what role playing games are. Hopefully, introducing people into RPGs or even new RPGs. Sometimes introducing older players back into old systems. And today we have Shep, who is the creator of Gaia Complex, and has been a writer and helped out on tons of RPGs that hopefully we'll talk about a little bit about, and some of those cool experiences. Because just getting a quick rundown of some of the things he's worked on is pretty awesome. So, well, let's kick this off. Tell us. Let's start with your newest game here, Gaia Complex. What's the first thing you
Sure.
want to tell us about that game?
Well, I would be doing myself an injustice if the first thing I didn't tell you about was the current Kickstarter campaign for the first source book for the Gaia Complex. We're actually in the last. It's 7 o'clock, so we're in just crossed the final 48-hour mark of that campaign. So now is a great time to get on board and have access to both the original book and the new source book. So yeah, it's a with broad strokes, it's a cyberpunk RPG set in a dystopian Europe, and it has a few things that are quite different compared to a lot of cyberpunk RPGs, particularly the influence of the big bad in the world, which is split between artificial intelligence and vampires. So vampirism is a very serious threat within the world. If you imagine merging Blade Runner with Blade, you get somewhere close to the kind of feel of the world that exists for the Gaia Complex. So yeah, we launched a core book last year. It was published last year, and yeah, we're moving on to supplementary material now.
Nice. Yeah, we've covered this a couple times on Mondays. We talk about Kickstarters and games that are coming out and stuff like that, and I think we've covered it twice during the campaign. And being the last 48 hours, we'll probably cover it again tomorrow. And excited to see how's the response been to the original core rules. I mean, obviously pretty decent if you're putting out additional material for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very much a passion project. It's a labor of love, and I work full time in the RPG industry for a major publisher. So I've always had the option to investigate, kind of putting it through normal channels, distribution channels. But myself and the artists that work on the Gaia Complex is very much a huge investment of our love, and we kind of want to do it the small way and build a little community and stuff. I know the ground up project that we do on the side from our day job, so to speak. Reception to the core book has been like stunning. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work on a number of reputable IPs in the RPG industry, but the feedback for both the way that the story is presented, the rules and mechanics, and the artwork. I mean, I can't recall reading a single negative comment about the core book, and that blows my mind because I've worked on enough RPGs for people to have read enough comments about people saying, "Dude, this sucks," on things that I've written on, and every time it burns just that little bit. But feedback's been stunning. I'm really, really proud of what we've achieved with that sort of 288 page core book, and if nothing else, it served to motivate us to keep writing content for this world. Yeah.
Nice. It's always good to get that feedback, and sometimes that negative feedback on a project will lead you to be doing something better in the future. So it's good that
Absolutely. I mean, you can't.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I know that you can't please everybody. Like I say, I've worked on enough games to know that there's for every two people that love an IP, there's one person that just doesn't have time for it or strongly dislikes it. For every person that loves a specific type of dice mechanic, there's 3, 4, 5, or 6 that hate that type of dice mechanic, and that is just the nature of the games industry. But yeah, you know, to have largely positive feedback throughout for a product is really, really empowering, and for it to be something that you've invested so much time and love into and written every word and laid out all the books and done all the graphic design, and it's really exciting when people go, this is pretty cool. It's a really nice feeling.
Nice. Yeah, it's sometimes it's tough filtering out what is just people hating on you for the sake of hating on you, and people like actually trying to give you that constructive. Sometimes even the constructive hate. I think a lot of games, a lot of games and movies have just, they take the hate and go, okay, well, we need to figure something out, and we end up getting just most bland things. And then occasionally you get something like the Sonic movie that everyone was like, what the F is this? And people flipped their head. And then the studio went back and said, fine, okay, we're going to fix Sonic. And then the movie did well. And I actually really enjoyed it. I was happy that they went back and fixed Sonic. I also love the people that, it's like, oh, well, they did that so that they could generate buzz. They'd only made that short clip make it look bad. I was like, okay, whatever. Now you guys are conspiracy theorists. So one of the things we were talking about kind of tails into one of the questions somebody had. And let me pull the question. So Gaia Complex looks like at face value, a bunch of niche genres put into a blender: cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic wastelands, environmental eco-disaster, vampires, mega cities of Judge Dredd, even insane AI of Paranoia or Portal. How do you know the balance is right when mixing genres together?
Well, for me, it's about the story. Okay, so mixing genres is fine, and I think it's important. It prevents rehashing of existing IPs and existing material. It's very easy for people to be, something comes out, it's another fantasy dungeon crawl, it's another cyberpunk RPG, it's another, you need things to set worlds apart, and for me, that's done through storytelling. When I originally came up with the concept for the Gaia Complex, I was planning to write a novel. So this was probably 4 years ago, and I fleshed out, a start, middle, and end point for a novel. And I started writing and realized that I was never going to finish it. So then I decided to kind of have a little compilation of short fiction, which I moved into that process of doing, like a kind of, a smaller book with multiple few-page stories that kind of fleshed out a world. And a friend of mine was like, I shared it with a couple of people who work in the industry or editors, and they were like, have you thought about, maybe like approaching Netflix, because this would make a really pretty awesome series, and you can ride on the back of things that have been really popular, like Altered Carbon, and like that kind of genre. There's a lot of sort of Korean and Japanese shows that we're seeing that kind of fall into that category at the moment. They're doing really well, and I kind of briefly looked into that and realized that was like just a minefield and well out of my comfort zone of trying to find a way into. And then the realization hit me that like I'm an RPG writer and I have been for quite a long time. So maybe I should just split this short fiction up and stick some rules between it and flesh that world out. And so I decided to just stick to doing what I know how to do. But what's really important is that the Gaia Complex tells a story. Every chapter starts with a piece of fiction, which is episodic in the way that you would expect something like a Netflix series. It introduces various characters living their own lives in the world, and I get to tell the story and set scenes through the eyes of characters rather than just kind of telling a player or a GM what that world looks like. And being able to introduce people's feelings about things in the world, like the existence of vampirism, and about the public's feelings towards Gaia, which is the overbearing AI which governs the city and controls atmospheric processing of food production and water supplies. The hands of humanity is given to a computer, and being able to, rather than just tell you like what that looks like, being able to explain it through the voices of people is like really, really powerful. And I think that's the best way to merge various genres, is to tell stories through the eyes of different people. And I just think it makes much more sense when you try to stick stuff together. I agree, there's a lot of influences in here. Importantly, and I won't say too much because obviously I really want people to read the book, but the Gaia Complex has what we'll call a meta plot. There is a very important underarching story and a big secret, which is revealed through reading this episodic fiction and seeing the culmination at the end of the core book. And the influence of a number of these elements are deliberately connected to some of those references that you read out at the start of this question. And it's explained exactly why that those references seem so much like all those things you just listed. I won't say any more, because if you want to know exactly what the hell I'm talking about, you're going to need to pick up the book and read the last chapter, which is called The Gaia Complex, which explains the big secrets of the world. But yeah, it's a deliberate mishmash of different influences, but the story serves to give those meaning and make sense.
Nice. I love the inclusion of the sales pitch as well.
Buy the book.
Yes. And we always encourage people to buy the material. It never hurts having several different types of RPGs on the shelf.
Yes, I've got one or two.
Yeah, the library started with just pulling a few hundred books out of my stuff, taking it to an event, and since 2017 is when we started. We grew from 345 books to we need to do an inventory, but we're somewhere around 6,000 books now.
Nice. I'm assuming you don't try and lug them all to Gen Con.
Oh no, we take we've split the library up into two smaller libraries. One that we can send to something like Gen Con, and then still have something for local events. So we'll have one that's going to Origins, and then that one probably may not be back here by the time we need to ship to Gen Con. So the other library will go to Gen Con, and then Library B will be back here. We're going to so many events this year. It's going to be kind of a shell game with the libraries. We just got instead of getting a larger storage space to work in, we're getting a second unit. So we're going to move the library all into one unit, and then slowly move into the second unit as we do our inventories. It's going to be entertaining.
Nice.
So we kind of talked about the different genres that you touched on, and knowing that you've worked on a ton of games in the past, like, what were your influences or catalysts to start writing all the groundwork for what became Gaia Complex?
I've always been a huge fan of the cyberpunk genre. One of my earliest role-playing experiences, I think I must have been, 16 years old, 15 years old. And that was Cyberpunk 2020. I had a friend who was really into Shadowrun, or his older brother was really into Shadowrun. And he really tried to get us hooked on it, and I never really gelled with the setting of Shadowrun, which is kind of ironic because, the Gaia Complex has got some non-human elements to it. And I've had a number of people go, so is it kind of like Shadowrun? I'm like, well, it's certainly not inspired by Shadowrun, that's for sure. But Cyberpunk 2020 was a huge influence to me on the role-play games industry. And then shortly after that, I was introduced to Slay Industries, which dominated my life for like 10 years. I just became obsessed with that setting. And Yeah, and it became a huge privilege to then be involved in working on Slay Industries towards the end of the first edition line and into second edition a bit down the way. But the genre in general, movies, fiction, the work of William Gibson, and I've just always been slightly obsessed with the idea of one day owning my own cyber arm. And I figured that probably won't happen. So, writing about it could be a good way to vent that frustration of never having my own. So that's kind of where it began. And because I started with fiction, I started with creating characters, and then I kind of cottoned on to the sort of idea of maybe one day it could be a Netflix series or something. So I ended up kind of casting the characters in my mind. Like every major character in the story, I've kind of cast. Like who would I get to play this person on a Hollywood budget and on a Netflix budget. So I've kind of got a choice A and a choice B, and developing characters around that and imagining those people being real people, and it just really motivated me to keep writing. And that core book, I mean, it's 288 pages, and I wrote every word in that book, and it took probably 18 months to finish it. But whilst freelancing on other stuff and working full time, I think that's a pretty decent pace. And I was just so motivated to write it. Like I couldn't stop writing it. When you get the bug for something, it's really kind of cool. But yeah, the cyberpunk genre. When I grew up, my dad's favorite movie growing up was Blade Runner. I kind of force fed Blade Runner as a kid. Well, probably not a kid, but like as soon as I was old enough to watch it, I was force fed Blade Runner. And then I also watched Aliens when I was far too young to watch Aliens, and it terrorized me for but I wouldn't walk up the stairs on my own for like 3 months because I was convinced to be like an alien on the ceiling waiting for me. And but those kind of things stay with you. Like I was 40 last week, and I remember watching the experience of watching those movies when I was like, I don't know, like 13, 14 years old, and that just stays with you. Great cinema has been a big influence for me through my whole writing career. Yeah.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s are some just magical stuff for movies. I mean, I was a real little kid, and Alien had been out long before. I'm only a couple years older than you, but Alien had been out, and we ended up with a copy. His family owned a comic book store, and my dad's like, "Oh, you don't want to watch that. That's going to scare you." And I was like, "I want to watch it." I was like 5 or 6, and then afterwards, my dad's, he's like making sure that, I'm not going to freak out. It was like, whoa. And he was like, oh, okay, my kid's not normal. I remember watching Blade Runner, and definitely didn't understand Blade Runner as a kid, but visually, everything about that movie just made me, I loved it as a little kid. I think I was like 9 or 10 the first time I saw it, and it was just like, didn't get the concepts, but man, did I just like everything about it made me go, whoa, this world is so cool, and wanted to play RPGs like that.
Yeah, I think it was around the same time, maybe a year or two after that, I kind of caught wind of manga as an animated movie company, and I remember watching Akira for the first time as a teenager, and I think that was probably the next revelation for me in like excitement. And that was around the time I'd started role playing a lot, and and then there was that just quick succession of incredible anime movies that came out after that. We had and around that time, and some before, like AD Police, and then we got Ghost in the Shell, and I think that really just solidified that this is like a genre that is just something in my life has to be. I have to do something in this world, in this genre in my life, and I think this is it. I think this is my outlet. This is my kind of making up for all those teenage years of thinking about my own cyberpunk future.
Did you grow up also reading 2000 AD?
I did. I was a bit late getting into 2000 AD, and I was much more into sort of Marvel comics at the time. Like I was a huge Wolverine fan, and I used to kind of go to the newsagents every fortnight and pick up the. I still remember it vividly. And there was the series was it was Wolverine and Nightcrawler on one side to the middle of the comic book, and you turn the comic book over, and it was Doctor Strange and Ghost Rider on the other side to the middle of the comic book. It was like a dual comic book. It was just great. Like that was really my thing. 2000 AD, I only really liked 2000 AD for the ABC Warriors. I never really liked Judge Dredd that much, but I was like, Hammerstein is badass, and I was like really into the sort of mech side of things. Yeah, I think that's like kind of that anime part of me that just wants giant robots.
It it's kind of funny because you say that Cyberpunk was 2020 was a huge influence to you, but then you bring up anime and giant robots, which if you know Mike Pondsmith wrote Mechton and
Zeta, yeah.
yeah, so it's like you're just kind of gone down like his list of games that he created through the 80s and everything. Have you ever gotten a chance to meet him or sit down with him?
Say that again, sorry.
Have you ever gotten a chance to sit down with Mike Pondsmith at all?
I have not. My time stateside has been extremely limited. When I was in my early 20s, I worked for Games Workshop at their global head office in Nottingham in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I worked for Forge World, which I don't know if you're a gamer or not, but they kind of make the super expensive kits.
I got a 50,000 point orc army, so
nice, cool.
I got a Thunderhawk in my house.
Beautiful. So I worked for Forge World for a period of time, and so whereas every country has like a global head office. So if there's a Games Day in America, America run it, and if there's Games Day in Germany, Germany run it. There's only one Forge World, and we had to go to every country all over the world. And I got to go to LA and Toronto and Sydney in Australia, and just to like go and sell toy soldiers for a couple of days. And so aside from that, and a couple of years ago, my other half's dad got married and decided that they were just going to invite. So there was just the two people getting married, and me and my other half went there. Were the only guests to the wedding, and they decided, for some reason, even though they live right here, that they were going to get married in Central Park in New York on New Year's Day, in like leopard skin cloaks, and just like it was just the most ridiculous thing ever. So I went and had a week in New York, and I spent some time going over for gaming shows when I worked for Games Workshop. But aside from that, my time in the US has been very limited, and I've never managed to get to a Gen Con or the kind of event where I might get to shake Mike Pondsmith's hand, and I've not been aware of him being in the UK at any conventions over the years. If he has been, I've certainly missed him. So no, I would love to. He's on that list. I had a list of people. One day I'm going to shake these people's hand. Like Trent Reznor was really high on that, and I managed to tick that one off. Nine Inch Nails, front man. And Mike Patton was on there. So most of them were musicians, to be fair. I managed to tick a few of them off. I never got as far as Chris Cornell, unfortunately. That one never worked out. But yeah, Mike Pondsmith's on that list.
I got to meet Chris Cornell mid-2000s. So it was a really nice, genuine guy. Seemed like, you can tell when you meet somebody, like whether they're there because they have some contractual agreement, like, yeah, we're gonna go grip and grin. He felt like he was genuinely there because I was in active duty military at the time, and he felt like he was like genuinely wanted to meet and greet soldiers and airmen and say, hey, thank you for what you do, like, keep it up. You're just like, it was a really genuine moment with that guy. And I've met tons of celebrities while I was doing what I did in the active military, and so many of them like, oh yeah, you're like, oh, it feels like you're here under court order. He was the exact opposite.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, Pondsmith, never met the guy, would love to. Maybe he'd say I ripped off a load of his ideas over the years, I don't know. But
he'll probably be excited. Yeah.
One day.
Maybe we can help arrange that, even if it's just through digital meeting or something.
That'd be great. I'd love to get a copy of the Gaia Complex in his hands and just let him have a flick through and hopefully make him smile.
Well, I bet you we could make that happen.
Sounds good to me.
They've been Mike, Lisa, and Cody have been, and Artel Sorian has been awesome with the library. They're great people. Mike and Lisa went through the library and were looking at old books, and they're like, "Oh, hey, you remember this? There were little dice." And Lisa's like, "Oh, I remember we were up all night stapling those dice in before we shipped those books out." Just great little stories about those two. But yeah, we'll get a copy of your book into his hands.
Nice. One of my most prized RPG things that I own is I have a complete collection of Cyberpunk books. I think there's 67 expansions of Cyberpunk 2020, including all the third-party ones, the Ionis games and the Atlas games ones. And I have one of everything, and only one of them is in really crap condition. And because getting a good one on, I can't even remember which one it is. It's one of the Ionis games expansions, and finding a good quality one on eBay just never cropped up. But they're just having that sort of 67, 68 books on the shelf together. It's like, that's the Cyberpunk corner. That's always there, just to glance at and make me happy when I'm feeling a bit down.
So you mentioned you've worked on a ton of other games. What are some other games that you've worked on over the years? So you brought up Slay Industries. Which first edition is a Scottish game, if I recall correctly.
Correct. Yeah. Developed in Scotland. I was a player of it, as a teenager when it came out. I think it's 23 years old now. First edition, 23, something like that. 23, 24 years old.
I think early 90s. It was like 92, 93, if I recall correctly.
I should know
because it was like. Yeah, it was a couple years after Shadowrun. So yeah, 92 or 93, if I recall correctly.
So first edition came out, and I was obsessed with that. And many years later, and Nightfall Games had this kind of a period of inactivity for a while. After the glory days of the RPG industry, when we kind of had that kind of quiet dip, and. It's a very long story, but
quiet dip is a nice way to put like the entire like almost utter destruction of the industry in the late 90s. Quiet dip.
Yeah, but we don't like to accept that we were defeated by the video game industry for a while. So but we I came into contact. It's a very long story, and I won't go into great detail. But I had an opportunity to help out Nightfall Games when they got into a partnership with another company. That partnership went quite sour, and that company did some damage to the IP through an attempted release of a miniatures game. And I basically was in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, and was able to come on board, basically offered the job of coming on board to complete the rule system for that miniatures game so that they could deliver what the partner company had promised before they kind of went pop. So I got involved in Slay Industries working on the miniatures game, and then after that, the final book for first edition, which was the big, hefty Cannibal Sector 1 hardback book. There was about half of that book still to write, and so I came on board as a writer and wrote, I don't know, like 200 and something pages of this final source book for Slay Industries, which was a dream come true for somebody who'd dabbled in the games industry and written on a few things, but this was like a dream project. And then after that, I, for a period of time, held the mantle as a director at Nightfall Games, and I wrote the rule system for Slay Industries second edition, and wrote quite a large chunk of that first book for second edition. And the rule system that I developed for that is the rule system that's in the upcoming Terminator RPG, which is due to get published now, which I think it's at the printers. And it's kind of become Nightfall Games' in-house rule system, which is really cool. I think they're probably going to be using it on their. They recently signed their license for the Stokerverse RPG as well. So Bram Stoker, Dracula, and all the associated IPs. So I think my rule system, with modifications from the current team over there, will be appearing in that as well. So yeah, Nightfall Games. I've done a lot of work with. Great bunch of guys. Dave and Jared are still there. The guys that from Scotland that made the original game, or certainly and all that amazing artwork that you people know Slay Industries for. That's all kind of Dave Allsop's work. It's really it's been really great to work with those guys over the previous few years. Very cool. So yeah, Slay Industries aside, I've done writing work for the upcoming Kings of War RPG. I worked on the Devil's Run. I did some writing work on Infinity RPG for Modiphius before. So I'm actually employed. Well, I think it's all right for that to say. I'm employed by Modiphius. I work for them as a project manager, and I handle a number of IPs for those guys. And before that, and the way I met those guys was that I wrote for them as a freelance writer on Infinity. And the last wave of books, which is coming out for Infinity, I've done something for each of those, like last 4 or 5 publications that come out for them as well. So that's kind of a little scattering of what I've done as a writer. And with Modiphius, I've done project management work on IPs like Conan and Dune, Actum Cthulhu, a range of other bits and pieces as well. So yeah, I mean, bits and pieces. I don't know, spread myself a bit wide for a while, trying to get my fingers in as many pies as possible. But yeah, it's been a big honour to work with various publishers on various little IPs and stuff. You're digging for something now, aren't you? Lovely. If you open that, you can find my name on the credits page. That's a great book. Have you seen Did you see the Exarchs edition? Did you manage to see?
No. Oh, don't. I love special editions of rule books, especially like taking them to the library and sharing them with people. Just getting people go. They get super excited, like sitting down with like really well made collections. Because I get frustrated when somebody takes they just take the core rules, the same innards, and just put a new cover on it. Unless you're telling me like it's an alternate cover art or whatever. Some companies, like when they do awesome special editions, like Fantasy Flight for all the Warhammer games, they went over the top with all their collector's editions, the metal cases and stuff. Those are people will sit down and drool over those because they're just so cool. So now I'm gonna have to look up the special editions of
the Exarch edition for Actum Cthulhu is really quite special. So it's both the GM's guide and the player's guide in one book. So with a consolidated index for the pair of them, and it's black faux leather with gold embossed gilting. It's got gold page edging, and it's got 2 ribbons, so you can have a ribbon within the player's guide and within the GM's guide as well. I agree. Most special editions are a swapped cover, different end pages, and a ribbon. That's the kind of typical thing, which is really more of a sort of a alternative cover. But the Exarch edition for that is really very special. It's 2 books in one with it's very very.
And the price isn't horrible. I just pulled it up on Modiphius's website. So 120 pounds, whatever that is in dollars. That's not horrible when you're getting both the GM and the player's guide, and it is. Whew, that is actually
really
released.
Special. Have I got one?
Got one. Black Sun Exarch Collector's Edition. That I don't need.
Yeah, it's a special book. I'm very honoured to have worked on that book as a project manager. I remember sending the files to print and then getting the proof copy through and being like, "We've done it. It's really special." So yeah, there's one on my top of my bookshelf behind me. It's really it's an excellent book.
Nice. Yeah, I was happy to pick these up. Local game store got these in and basically gave them to us at cost, which was really nice. Some of our local game stores try to support us as best they can because it's much different when a publisher is trying to give us a book versus like some local game store because they don't have the same profit margins.
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely.
And you got a nice broad repertoire of games that you've worked on. And it's funny because I think we only have one copy of Slay, the original Slay Industries, in the library. And if it's in one library, invariably everybody's requesting it at the other library. We always get questions about it.
Have all the pages fallen out of it?
No, actually, they have not.
That's quite special because first edition Slay has a reputation for having the worst glued pages in history, and that and its first source book just collapse the moment you breathe on them. So,
and it's hilarious because both of those books in the library, and they've been gone through a ton, and they get put in and out of boxes and travel a lot. Ours are still together, which is mind-boggling because most copies I've seen are either in page sleeves or somebody's three-hole punched them, something.
Yeah,
I
have one of each. Yeah, I have one of each in ring binders for reading, and one of each that's still intact for never touching again in case they fall apart. That's my.
And the longer it sits, the worse the glue gets. So you're gonna look over your shelf one day, and the spine's just gonna fly across the room.
Keep the blinds closed. No, don't let sunlight get on my Slay Industries books.
Yeah, your books have just become vampires. I always love hearing the inspiration behind why people get into the industry, and I actually like yours because yours is a lot different. And then I also find it kind of funny because you've taken this big genre mashup to keep things exciting, and then you said you weren't a big fan of Shadowrun, which the only reason Shadowrun exists to this day is because it came out right after Cyberpunk 2020, and they needed to be different, so they crammed magic and fantasy in there, which made a cool setting, but that setting's really the only reason Shadowrun is still around, because it was an original take on doing something with Cyberpunk.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it was like, if you look at the time, Cyberpunk 2020 and Dungeons and Dragons were the two forefront roleplay games, so why not glue them together? It kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense from the standpoint. I don't know, something about it never really clicked with me. I don't, and I it was first and second edition I tried to play once or twice and never really
first
got on with, yeah, it was a bit messy. I circled back with some of the later stuff, and I think I've got the 4th or 5th edition core book. I think I just kind of picked up the core book in a sale, and I just thought I'll give it a go. And I got like a starter box that's got a lot of maps in and stuff, and I've used the maps for running other gaming sessions, but I've never used them in a Shadowrun session. There's some great maps in there. Well done, guys. You made some perfectly good maps.
And the rules have definitely gotten better over the years. And part of the reason why first edition was so bad was the fantasy aspect of it was stapled in at the last 6 weeks before going to print. So the story goes, the lead designer is at home sick with 101 fever, and they're bugging out that they're just going to put out another game that and Shadowrun 2020 was beating them to market, and we need to do something different. And he calls up the team. He's like, I know, we're going to add magic, and this is weeks before sending it to print. So they've got to add all the rules for the races, all the rules for the magic. They go back and add they rewrite everything within 6 weeks. They have to order new art. And then just cram it all together, and then that's why 18 months later, second edition came out.
I do remember there was a video advert for Shadowrun. It's really legendary. You've probably seen it, with some people kind of slowly making their way down an alleyway and then plugging into a hacking. I mean, it's like every terrible action movie you've ever seen in your entire life stuck into one. It's but it just captures the spirit of that genre and era of gaming so perfectly. It's cringeworthy, but in a way that just makes you think, this made me want to play this game.
Yes, it is. It is perfectly '90s in everything about it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're watching out there, go look up Shadowrun commercial, and it should pop up in the first few on YouTube. It's because it
Oh,
is on YouTube.
it's very special. It's very special.
Yes. No, it's exciting because because so many people have hearing the inspiration, like especially why people got into the field, is always intriguing, and nobody even remotely has the same story. So when we get into that, talking about people like how'd you get how'd you get into doing this, and it's funny because you bring up Slay Industries, which hit over here, but it definitely didn't hit as big as it did in the UK. I know Germans that played
Yeah.
it, but finding Americans that were really driven by the game, it definitely wasn't as big of a hit over here. So most of the people, like when you get people like, oh yeah, then you find out they had friends or relatives overseas that had talked about it, or some GI had brought it back from when he was stationed in the UK and introduced it to his cousins or something like that. And it was always this weird smattering over here, and it you don't meet too many people that Slay Industries was a huge driving force behind their creative nature or getting into the industry, or for you, even
Mm.
your vehicle for getting into the industry.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess my step into the industry was working for Games Workshop.
Yeah.
And even though I worked for Games Workshop, and I didn't work in a store, like I say, I was a salesperson. I worked for Forge World. So if you phoned up Forge World to place an order, I'd pick up the phone. And if you went to a show and went to the Forge World stand, I'd be the guy serving you. And I
There's a
was
good
also
chance
the
we
guy
met
that had to get.
at a game day.
Yeah, quite possibly. We used to have a load of American guys that worked with us. They used to call the Outriders. It was like a kind of volunteer thing, and we
Mm-hmm.
used to wear an Outrider t-shirt. Some of those guys, and a lot of those guys are military or ex-military guys. I always got the impression that, at least where the U.S. military was concerned, there was a really big wargaming contingent. Was kind of or maybe they just all the guys that were involved all went to Games Day. But I kind of met quite a few guys. There was a guy called Tim who I still stay in touch with occasionally on Facebook, and yeah, it was a great bunch of people involved in that over there. But even though I wasn't working in games development, I made a lot of friends in Games Workshop who worked in the studio, sculptors, painters, game writers, and some of those people are still good friends now. In fact, I play Blood Bowl with some of the guys I work with there who were heavy metal painters at the time. I've still got a lot of friends from that industry, and I've always had that influence of people working in the games industry around me, and me being a little bit jealous that I'm not. So eventually, through dabbling with, I was a war gamer before I was a role player, then I was a role player, and then I kind of, in the downturn that we spoke about, I kind of transitioned into board gaming a bit more. Um, but now I'm fortunate enough to have two kids who are passionate 40k players, and there's four of us in this household, and all four of us are gamers. And my hobby writing, I have a lady in my life that was like, just put it out there, put things out on Kickstarter, approach games publishers, go and do what you love, get out of jobs that you don't enjoy doing. And I was prodded enough that I went and did that, and people were like, "Yeah, man, your stuff's cool. Come and work for us." And
Nice.
that's great. So yeah, I'm very fortunate to have eventually fallen into that, and I think Nightfall Games and the Slay Industries guys were the big window opening for me to move from that being acknowledged as a freelancer to finally people wanting to put me on a payroll and have my services available full time. So yeah, Slay Industries has gone through everything, through making me survive my teenage summer holidays, through role playing, up to getting my first big name RPG published book as well. There's guess I owe the Nightfall guys a lot.
Nice. Well, we love it when people get introduced to stuff like Slay Industries, because it's a really, really cool game. It's a really cool world, and it's nice to know that you had a hand in closing out that the first chapter of Slay and getting into the second edition of Slay. So I think we missed the Kickstarter on that when it was out. So we need to get a couple copies of second edition into the library so that we can share that. Let me get to a couple of silly question that someone asks of all of our people on Patreon. Hot dogs or tacos?
Hot dogs.
Hot dogs.
Not even going to hesitate. Hot dogs.
Then we always have a joke that hot dogs could be a form of tacos, because you got the taco shell and the meat, and the hamburger bun's just a fluffy taco shell.
One of my two kids, his favourite food in the world is hot dogs. So if we ever have Kate, it's your meal pick. What do you want this week? Hot dogs.
Hot dogs.
Every time.
Nice.
Hot dogs. So whether I like them or not, I have hot dogs a lot more than I have tacos. but yeah, I do. I'm quite fond of hot dogs. I'm quite fond of hot dogs.
I always find that question is just fun. Let's see. How different is the experience of working on a personal independent project like Gaia Complex when compared to working with a full team at Modifius?
Oh man, I mean it's totally different. It's the let me just try and be diplomatic about the way I voice it. No, but the beauty with the Gaia Complex is it's just like I can wake up at 2 a.m. and have an idea, and I can put that in a book. Yeah, people say the best ideas come to you when you're sat on the toilet, and if they do, it's going in the book. Like it's me, right? It's all me, and I can do what the hell I want. And I write the Gaia Complex in view of if I was going to sit and play this game, what do I want in there? Right? It's a selfish project, and I have got no shame in admitting that. It's completely selfish. People are like, we do this whole the adventure, the scenario concept in the Gaia Complex called data seeds, right? And every pre-written adventure is 1 page long, exactly 1 page. We have an introduction, 2 or 3 suggested scenes, and a summary of what would happen at the end. And it's like, here's enough information for you to flesh out a 1 evening of gaming, and throw some scenes and some challenges. And if you want to stitch a load together, that's your campaign. Otherwise, maybe it'll just inspire you. And the core book actually says, if you want a game that releases campaign books that has, like a detailed 50-page, 60-page campaign with the NPCs, you mean what's going to happen, this is not that game, right? We're really sorry, we're not going to do that. And we do have people, I've had people email us going, have you thought about doing a long-form campaign for your next book? And I have to say, no, because I don't want to write one. So that's literally the way that this works is I want all this, and I speak to Jesus and can you draw this for me because I really want to put it in the book. He's like, yeah, cool, I'll draw that. And I'm brilliant. It's like the smoothest system ever because it's just in my head. Obviously also means that, if you don't like the way I think, then you're going to hate it. But that's fine, right? When you're working on a big project, particularly if it's an IP that is owned by a film studio or a computer games publisher, I mean, you're playing in their ball court, right? You are working to their set of rules, to their style guide. As a writer, in many ways, it's not that different. You get a brief, there'll be a style guide to work to, and there'll be a few things that you must not touch. Don't write about that, don't change that. So from the writing perspective, it can be challenging, but it's not hugely different because I write myself a writing brief. I'm like, right, this chapter is about X. It has to cover A, B, and C, and I need to do it in less than 8,000 words. Okay, so I still have some kind of restrictions when I write my own stuff. But when you're a project manager, project managing the Gaia Complex is just basically non-existent because I'm a writer and it's just whatever I want to do. On something like a big IP, you've got the whole approvals minefield. Everything you write, every piece of art you produce needs to be approved by somebody else, and you can't ever fully understand what another publisher or IP owner sees in their IP. You can talk to them, you can get their style guide, you can get their visual references, you can watch their movies, you can play their games. You're never going to fully understand what they think this character should be like behind closed doors. You can think you've got everything spot on, and then if things will go to approvals and they'll come back and go, "Oh, actually, this guy we think he'd be way stricter than that," or "We don't think he's definitely a taco guy, and you've given him a hot dog." Like that's not good enough. So you're gonna, and it's amazing how much work you have to do twice, even when you've really done your homework. But also, there's so many moving parts. As an example, as project manager, I would have to. Often you'll have a creative lead or a line editor that will kind of be the last point of reference for creators. We can have a writing team, an editing team, and it's going to go to proofing, then it's going to go to layout. Layout are going to give it you back. You're going to get that proofread. After proofreading, it's going to go to approvals, and the approvals are going to say yes or no with changes, and then that's going to come back. Then you're going to make any changes that are needed in the layout, and oh man, I even skipped out art direction, and it's just so many moving parts being stitched together, and it's a huge focus on timelines, and that's the really big thing: timelines and deadlines. Because you're not only working to when you as a publisher want to release a game into retail, you've got to bear in mind when you get the files off to print, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks till you've got those books in your hand, and then you've got, at the moment, moving stock around the world is agonizing, and you've got to plan and work so far in advance, and it can be pretty stressful, when you're like, okay, I've got 7 weeks to meet this deadline, and the freight company need 9 weeks to get it there. How do I save 2 weeks without like helicopter lifting it in at £1 million a pallet or something? There's a lot of problems to solve. With the Gaia Complex, I'm the boss, and I'm also the lowest ranking employee in the company. So I'm like, my deadline is when it's ready, guys. And, if I have to cut, okay, that's not going to work. I'll have to send it this way. I have to approve my own decisions. It's nice and simple. So it's pretty relaxed. But at the same time, I'm a pretty organized person. Like, we run a pretty tight ship. And I think if you ask the backers on the first campaign, I got some great feedback, keeping people in the loop and, being very transparent with our progress. I do a big spreadsheet breakdown of what's in every chapter, how many pieces of art need to be in there, how many are done, how much of the word count is done, like a traffic light system. And I'm really transparent. Here is my progress tracker. I'm giving it to you guys.
I wish more people were like that with their Kickstarters.
Yeah, I actually have to owe that to, and I don't know if he's listening, but I have to owe that to Mark Rapson at Nightfall Games and Wordforge Games. He is the first person I know that, so when we did Slay, he was like, when I helped take over that Slay situation where they were trying to salvage the war game, it was falling apart, and the backers were angry with the company that had kind of gone pop. He did this, he does it slightly differently to me, but he did this spreadsheet breakdown. Everything that has to be done, what we've made, what still needs to be made, how long it's going to take, what's done, what's already on its way to backers. And it was the first piece of transparency that people on that campaign had, and they needed it. And so I thought it was excellent. Like, it was one of his greatest ideas, and I just stole it basically, and I used it from day one. The moment the Kickstarter campaign ended on the core book, I said, okay, just so you know, this is what we've done. This is what's left. This is how many pieces of art we still need to do. These are the bits I need to write. This is what I've already edited. This is what's at the proofreaders. Complete breakdown. And it's effectively my project management log, and I just share it with backers. And I'll be doing the same with Hardware 2119. and people will be very happy when they see that it's like 95% green already. We're really, really far ahead of the curve
Nice.
on this book, so it's a really good place to be. So yeah, that's the
That's
difference. I don't have to answer to anybody. I can work on my own timelines. It's relatively relaxed, and not that I'm being whipped at Modiphius or anything. The guys are awesome to work with, but there's a lot of plates to spin when it comes to creating a book for Dune or Conan or something.
yeah,
It's amazing how many people are involved. You only have to look at the credits page on Act of Cthulhu and compare it to the credits page in my book. It's got like, I wrote it, I did the layout, I wrote the system, somebody else proofread it, this person did the art, thanks very much. The Act of Cthulhu page is like, there must be 50, 60, 70 names on there for people that have, yeah, exactly. And that's the difference between working on something at that level and something like, down here in my little corner of the world.
yeah. I think we're getting comments that more Kickstarter creators should steal what you stole to update people. It'd make so many campaigns that much better. And I also love that you kind of hit the nail on the head of so few people realize how painful it is to work on someone else's IP. I think one of the few stories that I've ever gotten from anyone, and then this was many years ago, talking to people at West End that were in the original Star Wars. Basically, their instructions were, do whatever you want, just don't include the main characters without permission, and don't go before episode 4, because Lucas is working on something for that. And that was like their left and right limits, so they went and made up everything. But everybody else, and then even people working on newer Star Wars stuff, they don't have that broad left and right limits. They are very defined, like, okay, this character does this does this. And if you don't have those, you end up with all the Star Trek books from the 80s and 90s that you try to piece the timeline together, and there's characters that are in different parts of the galaxy that are dead but now alive, and you're just like, nothing makes sense. Every Star Trek book was a standalone, and made no sense whatsoever. So you're trying to create that continuity with those characters that are consistent through your product, and if you don't keep those. If you don't keep those tight reins on people that are creating for you, you end up with space marines that are dating dark elves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have, I won't say who or on what game, but I have in the past had to ask a freelancer who wrote the best part of 10,000 words to rewrite probably 8,000 of them.
Oh.
And there was really good writing and a very good writer, and it just came back from approvals with just like red lines on everything, and they're just like, oh, this can't happen because we've got this planned for like something that we're going to release in about 6 years time. We just forgot to tell you that thing was like, and you were like, and it doesn't really line up, so we're like, oh, can you share the thing with us that you're planning to do so we don't touch? Oh, no, just rewrite it, and if it's wrong again, we'll tell you. And you kind of run into that kind of situation. Like not all some publishers are just like, here's something for approvals, and they'll just go like, does it have a name on the front? Yes, then it's approved, we don't care. And other people are like that. I think if I had to pick one big IP that would still be a dream for me to write on, it would probably be Star Wars. But at the same time, I don't know if I could survive the fan flaming that I might get for putting my name on a Star Wars product. The concept scares me, and a huge respect to FFG and that crew for getting what must have been the best part of 30 books out for the Star Wars RPG recently, because I can only imagine what the Star Wars approvals process is like based on some of the IPs I've been involved in.
It's a ugly quagmire is the best I can describe it from individuals I've talked to offline. And I think the best time to have done anything for Star Wars was the 80s, 90s, late 80s through the 90s, before Lucas really jumped in and said, "Oh, I'm killing everything that is Legends. I'm making everything up all over again." And people blame Disney for killing Legends. Lucas had done it with the prequels, because the prequels just destroyed so many of the established books that had been approved by Lucas or Lucas Arts. And I think that period of time to create for Star Wars was like 87 to 90 98.
Yeah.
That 10 or 11 year period would have been awesome. Somebody
I've
asked,
got a copy of the. Oh, go,
go ahead.
go for it. I was going to say I've got a copy of the second edition, revised and expanded Star Wars core book. It's full of the stills from the movie, the Falcon on the front, and the character illustrations are really great. And the super simple West End Games D6 system. That book is very special, and if I could have written for Star Wars then, like that'd have been a dream come true. Time machine.
no.
When we got time machines, I'm there.
I will go back and I will write books that didn't exist. Maybe I'll convince Lucas to do something better than Jar Jar. What did you do with your attempt to use a time machine? I got rid of Jar Jar Binks. I've never heard of that. Thank me.
Mr. Ruin franchise.
And that particular Star Wars book is one. It's the hardest one to find out of them, but it's just the cleanest rules. First edition's fun. Second edition is good. Second revised is so much easier, better laid out. Just the little tiny changes they made just made a huge difference. And those are the base mechanics for the Open D6 system now that's available. So the D6 system is available as open. I've been trying to get more people to use it.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great.
Somebody asked, Predator RPG? Question mark.
Question. Say that again. Predator.
Predator. As in like.
Well, yeah, that. I think that would be a great IP for Nightfall Games to pick up after Terminator. If Mark or Jared or Dave
go
are
down
listening,
the line of
then
Schwarzenegger movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be. I think that would be awesome. But then I guess I think this. I'm not an IP expert, but I'm pretty sure it's the same studio that have Aliens. So
I mean, so.
we've got what are they called? Help me out here. The guys that do the Aliens RPG.
Free League.
I feel terrible. But Free League. They've obviously already got an in, so let's not call it impossible. I think for an RPG, Predator is probably less than perfect because, what do? You do the team of Marines hunting the Predator, or you do a troop of Predator huntsmen, like hunting weird animals on alien planets.
Yeah.
Like, I love Predator. Like, I really love Predator, but I can't really picture what the RPG looks like.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of different directions you could go, and some of them could be very bad, like some of the newer movies.
Yeah, even putting Lawrence Fishburne in it can't save it,
Or the guy from The Pianist. Adrian Brody, I think it was, I just found it.
Yeah.
I think he did a good job in the movie. He was still a very strange choice for an Alien franchise lead, or a Predator franchise lead. I was like, okay, this is weird. Somebody, so you brought him up a little bit ago. You're artist, and the question is, you work closely with an artist, develop concept art for Gaia Complex. How often do you take inspiration for game mechanics from his art, and how often is the art derived from the game mechanics?
Sure. So me and Jesus have got a pretty cool relationship. We first worked together about 6 years ago. So I designed and developed a board game that I was going to kickstart maybe 6 years ago, and I didn't. And I actually licensed it out to another publisher, and eventually they didn't do anything with it and gave me the license back. And then I licensed it to another publisher, and I'm hoping they're going to do something with it this year. But Jesus did all of the art for that game, and I found the guy through Board Game Geek on the thread for game artists. I went scrolling for an artist, and I saw his style, and I loved it, and I got in touch with him, and we came to an agreement, and I paid him to do all the art for the game, characters and board and box, and packaged it all up. I mean, I probably should have just done it myself by now, but it's stunning art. It's great, and that board game is actually inspired by one of my other favorite all-time RPGs, which is In Nomine. So, like, a huge influence, which is completely not cyberpunk at all, but I friggin' love the concept of
Steve Jackson games.
angels and and angels and demons walking amongst movies like Constantine and things like that. It just does it for me. Like, I've actually got full-length wings tattooed down my back as well. Like, it's a thing that I just kind of have a thing for. So anyway, me and Jesus, we stayed in touch. He was very complimentary after we worked together and said, like, as an art director, I was really, really good to work for. I was very descriptive with my briefs and the source material I provided. And when I came around the Gaia Complex, I was like, man, I can't. I've worked on Slay Industries, so I have this now. I've created an expectation in myself that my book is going to be jammed full of gorgeous artwork. Like, above the standard that you see, we have more art than you expect to see in an average game book. And there's no way I can afford that much artwork up front. So let me tap into people that I know and have worked with. So basically, I managed to manipulate Jesus enough to work with me on a kind of go in on a partnership. I'll write everything, you do all the artwork, and we'll kind of figure it out at the end. Anyway, he's been amazing to work with. And whilst I guess my name hangs over the door for the Gaia Complex, he has basically bought this world of this, what was going to be a novel, then it was going to be a Netflix series, and eventually became a game. He's the guy that's really brought it to life, and he's got this uncanny knack of being able to draw exactly how I see it in my head. Nice. We work very well together, and I don't really want to ever have to work with many other artists if I can help it, because he is a talent, and he actually doesn't really do artwork for the games industry anymore. Other than this, he is actually a now very sought after tattoo artist, and he lives and works in Connecticut in the US. And I'm very fortunate that his one kind of indulgence in this industry is still to work on the Gaia Complex for me. And in terms of inspiring mechanics, not so much. Jesus is not really a role player himself, so he kind of stays away from the rules, and I just kind of talk at him sometimes, and he just goes, that sounds fine, sure, whatever. But what we've tried to do, and for anybody who's listening that has the core book already will kind of see this, is that every single piece of art in that book, and there's a lot of it, is specifically tied to the text around it. If we're talking about a place, the art piece that's there is that place. If we're talking about a weapon, that's the thing. If we're talking about an event, the artwork captures the event. If there's a piece of fiction, the artwork is what's happening in the piece of fiction. So the story visually is represented in the same way as the words. It's told through the book. And so what Jesus has done is he has created things from the words that were written in the book. But what's happened with that is, inevitably, there's always something left to interpretation. So there are elements of this world that have been brought to life through his artwork that I either didn't explicitly write about, or he's interpreted in a way that makes more visual sense. And then when I've gone back and revisited some of those concepts, like Hardware 2119 fleshes out a lot of things that we kind of planted little seeds in the core book. now I've had the opportunity to write more about them, and I've absolutely written about the things that was seen in those pictures in the core book that I didn't get to explain in that core book. So, and there are a few new things in Hardware 2119 where I kind of know what I want them to do in the rules, but for some reason I don't really have a full visual picture of them, and I've just kind of said, "Man, you just do it. You do your thing because it's always awesome, and I will fill in the blanks based on your thing." So we started off. He was very much like, "Give me an art brief. I'll draw your artwork." But now it's much more fluid, and there are areas where I'm like, "Okay, I'm writing about this, and I really need a piece of art that shows an arms deal taking place." Yeah, and it would be cool if we can, let's not just do some guys handing over some cash for some guns. Let's have some guys giving some vampire, like they're trading blood for illegal weaponry. Like, let's do something that kind of captures a bit more of the spirit of the Gaia Complex, right? So there's a blood trade gangs, and they're, like, yeah, all right, you can hook me up to a machine and drain me for an hour, but I want like some heavy artillery for that, like. And so I'll kind of be a bit looser with the briefs now, and Jesus just kind of knows, because really, visually, this world is his. That core book, every single piece of art, other than the outline work on a couple of the weapons, was done by Jesus. If it's not a map and it isn't a couple of the weapons that we just needed to catch up on time, then he did everything, every character, every scene, every landscape. He just gets it so well, and he's a real joy to work with. And his looking at his artwork definitely inspires the stuff I write these days.
Nice, and it's awesome to actually have that kind of connection with someone. And one of the things that I love, having looked through the first book, I try to tell people so much, like, never ever overlook the art. If a book looks good on the shelf, people will pick it up. I tell people, I have seen tons of games that have bad rules but beautiful art that people have bought and tried to play, and they'll get the original book gets sold, and a handful of expansions for it will get sold because they were gorgeous and people wanted them for the art, and go through them and go, "Oh, this is a horrible game." But I've seen tons of great games with no art or bad art that just get overlooked because no one ever picks them up.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you've got a good game system and phenomenal art, and the art will compel people to pick it up, and hopefully the system will keep them playing.
Yeah, that's certainly the plan. That's certainly the plan. And I completely agree. I mean, working for Modiphius, working for a bigger publisher, I can honestly say, and having worked with Nightfall quite a lot, I can honestly say that we're at a point now in the industry where artwork sells your games. Like, artwork absolutely is the biggest driving factor in people picking up a game and buying a game. And you are right, if it's got rules that are sack of spanners, people will put it back down and they'll slag it off on forums, and within time it'll get a reputation for not being great. But as long as your written content holds up to an expected quality, artwork is so critically important. A great written book these days with subpar artwork will never ever meet sales expectations. It just won't do it. It's just so important. And I'm very lucky to have Jesus on board with this still. And from conversations over recent weeks, I reckon he'll at least stick around for another book, fingers crossed. So I'm hoping I can continue to nurture that book by book and keep him on board. We have branched out a touch. Hardware 2119, we brought Glyn Seal back to do a map for us again. He did the cartography in the first book. And we have got another artist on board who so it's the first time we've kind of trusted somebody to do full illustration outside of Jesus. We've got an artist, JJ Ariosa, who came on board, who's done work on some pretty big board game projects in the past, things like Role Player, and I believe he worked on Mice and Mystics and things like that. So, and we wanted somebody whose style complemented Jesus's really well, and who just had a really nice flair, and we just wanted to get a slightly different flavour in the book, whilst also cutting down the time it takes to do all the artwork for a book.
Yeah,
JJ stuff
trying to load all of that onto one person can either slow the product down or just burn someone out.
Yeah. I mean, I know the slog that Jesus went through for the core book, and whilst obviously this is a smaller book, it requires less art. I'd much rather keep him happy if I can. So, JJ is a phenomenal artist and has done 2 pieces for us already, and we've got a bit more planned for them. But in true me style, I have access to a lot of artists through work, like a huge pool of artists I can just drop an email to. I decided, with the success I had in nurturing a relationship with Jesus, that I would go back to Board Game Geek and find somebody on Board Game Geek that I wanted to work on this book. So nice. I also found JJ's work through the artists available to work. So if you're an artist out there and you've ever had doubts about putting your stuff on that, artist's portfolio thing on Board Game, trust me, I go there to find people, and many other people do. It's a really great resource for people. Really great resource for people.
Any game designer out there, hey, if you're looking for artists, that instead of asking your buddies, like, do you know an artist? Why don't you go look for artists at Board Game Geek?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really easy to grab a FFG book off the shelf and open it and find big name artists, and then email them and cry when you find out how much it costs to get art from people whose names are like that big in the industry.
Yeah.
And honestly, you go to Board Game Geek and you will find artists who are easily as good as some of those guys that work on big industry games. And don't get me wrong, artwork is expensive, and artwork should be expensive, like writing and editing. Like, it's a skill set. If you want it done right and you want professionals to work on your product, you have to pay they've got a job to do, right? Yeah. You have to pay the right money for them. It's really important. But at the same time, they are not charging huge money because their stuff isn't on, Wizards of the Coast or FFG.
Yeah.
Probably. In fact, some of them are, but they're not like in-house, or they're not kind of go-to guys for those. They're charging sensible industry rates, and it's a great place to find creatives. I personally think, yeah.
One of my favorite stories on having that skill and knowledge, and some people, like, I do photography, and like, oh, I can just buy a camera and do it myself. I'm like, okay, whatever. But George Washington, first president of the United States, after he was done, he did a lot of survey work, and these 2 gentlemen were having an argument over property line, and they wrote him a letter. He came out, and just in a few minutes, boop, placed a stake, and then he said, I'll be, $25. And at the time, that was a decent chunk of money. And we need an itemized bill. So he writes them out a bill, and it was like 25 cents for stake and $24.75 for knowing where to place the stake. So, same thing with being a writer or an editor or an artist, a photographer. It's not just the raw talent that everybody wants to talk about. It's the years of getting to the point where you can do that, where you can consistently produce a good product for people. You don't just wake up one day and write. That's why I love all these celebrities that have books, and I'm like, yeah, who wrote the book? Like, I guarantee, J-Lo didn't sit down one weekend and knock out a book. Somebody came in and wrote it for her, and she gave them little bits and pieces that they put into the book, and she signed it.
Absolutely. And it's, especially where writing and editing is concerned, if you're doing that freelance in the industry, it's a really it's a real slog. You know, like it's hard to make good money out of freelance writing in the RPG industry. You know, it's really. I did it for a while. I never I never earned a living out of freelancing. I always had a job and freelance.
Yeah.
Um, I do know artists that manage to make a living out of freelancing, but they're really good artists that deliver consistently high level art and do it fast,
Yeah.
without cutting corners. And that's the hard thing, to be able to do art for 8, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, and produce, you know, two, three two art pieces a week, you know, half page US letter size art pieces in full detail, full color every single
Yeah.
week in non-stop. It's really hard work. Any writer that can earn freelance and pay the bills, I applaud, because it's very hard work. And you know, I wish there was an industry where creatives could be paid more. And I think on a whole, most publishers have definitely started paying more freelancers to work for them. The last 2 years, I've definitely seen an uptake in what I'm able to pay freelancers through working for a publisher, and what I've been offered by other publishers for freelance work. So it's a great sign that the games industry, is catching up with other parts of the publishing industry. But yeah, you know, it's being a writer, being an editor, being a proofreader. These things they're hard jobs, and it's even harder to make good money out of them.
Yeah, yeah. I've only known a couple writers that have made decent livings being freelancers, and they're so few and far between, because everybody, almost every single person I know that is freelance writer for anything, whether even people that are writing freelance news articles and stuff, they typically have a day job as well, or
Yeah,
a couple part-time jobs, so that they have the freedom to go do what they need to do for their freelance day job. Like, I'm a writer, but I have like three other jobs on top of that.
yeah, I can relate. I know that one.
And some of that is just because when you're doing that freelance stuff, it's sometimes it can be feast or famine. I've known a couple artists that have just back to back to back to back projects, and then 6 months no one talks to them, and they're like, "What did I do wrong?" And they're panicking. And it's just the people that had been hitting them up are done with their projects, and because they got so deep into those projects, they kind of disappeared from the face of doing things for other people, and now the people that were hitting them up no longer need them, and now they're going, what do I do? They have forgotten to keep active outside of the projects they're on. There's so many, when you're your own boss, you've gotta throw all those hats on. You gotta be that promoter, the manager, you gotta HR yourself. Be like, nope, we can't pay our bills with that pay. We've got to ask for more, or
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, especially if you're in the games industry, well, you can have a publisher love you as a writer and consider you a go-to writer, but they might only publish a book or two a year. You
yeah,
know, like, and that might give you, I don't know, like 2 months work out of the year, depending
yeah.
on your rate. 2, 3 months if you're lucky, if it's a big hefty book. And you've got to work out what you're going to do with the other 9 months.
Yeah, I know somebody a few years back. He was doing freelance stuff, and then he basically inked like an exclusive deal, and he was like, "Oh, this is going to be awesome," and he barely worked a third of the year, and because of the deal he inked with them, he only got paid for the what he was turning in, but he was only being requested, every couple of weeks, something small, and then hey, this is gonna cover me for a little while. And it's like, for him, he was like, if you're gonna do freelance, you got to leave yourself open. It's either you go work for a company full time and produce stuff for them, or you freelance to everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's tough, and it is really hard to get your name out to a wider audience. It's really tough.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah,
easy to think, oh man, I've written on a big book now. Everybody's going to notice me, but they're not. Unless you go to them, people They won't. Everybody's got a
Yeah,
pool of people they stick in, and you've got to force yourself into their little corner of the industry.
yeah, and it's hard. And going back, you gotta wear those hats. You gotta be your own publicist. You gotta go out and toot your own horn, and that's really hard for a lot of creative people to do because a lot of writers and artists are very introverted. So you're like, hey, you need to get out there and tell everybody how great you are. Hey, everybody, I'm really great. Or I
Yeah,
love
no,
telling
it's
and I'm really horrible about it too. So we've got a couple people that work that do stuff with the library that are great, that are much better at touting the stuff that I've done and what the library has done than I am. Um, it's funny. I've grown up in sales, and the thing I'm worst at selling is myself.
I think that's probably true of most salespeople.
Got one more awesome question here. Let's see. How did you arrive at a D12, arguably the very best die that exists? That's part of the question. And D3 dice system. Was this the conscious decision to get away from D20 that you're using at Modifius, or is this something that underlying that you've always loved the D12?
I have always loved the D12, and D12 it is my second favorite dice. My favorite dice is this particular D3, which kind of looks. Where's my
Oh,
camera?
there,
Here we go.
there you
Kind of
go.
like a little kidney bean.
Oh,
It's
nice.
like a smooth sounded triangle. These are the most beautiful thing in the world to roll. These are D&G dice. So anyway, I've got like a million of these. They're all over my desk, like I'm obsessed with them. Right, so I had to use them. So anyway, yeah, D12s are awesome. Originally, when I started the development of the system, of the 12.3 system, it didn't have a name. Obviously, 12.3 would have been ironic if it didn't have D12s in it. I was trying a D10 based system because I like D10s. I'm not a big fan of D20s as dice. Like they roll a bit too far and for a bit too long. The bigger the dice, the more it rolls. I've got a D100 somewhere around here as well. And like you roll that and it just like it's off down the other side of the
It's a
room.
golf ball.
And it's a golf ball. And so trying to find a system that works nicely. This will make a bit more sense if you know the mechanics of the game. If you don't know the mechanics of the game, go to Drive Through RPG and get the quick start. It's free. It's got 95% of the full system's rules are in it. So the rule system is not hefty, and therefore the quick start has most of the rules in it anyway. So, and it'll give you an overview to the mechanic. But basically, I was trying to find something that was reasonably elegant and relatable for people that have played RPGs before. Okay, so this game isn't really pitched at I've never played an RPG before and I want to play my first game. The GM's guidance assumes that you've run a roleplay game before. We aren't going to transcribe a whole campaign for you. But at the same time, I don't want something that's too meaty. Like the industry's moved a long way. Dice mechanics are important. People still love them, but I also don't want to be doing complex maths in the middle of a fight scene, right? So, what I ended up working on is I wanted to have this a sliding scale of difficulty, but then have this kind of, for want of a better term, the kind of the crit at the end. The kind of, but it'd be a negative crit. So you've got the like really really bad failure, and then a degree of difficulty from that. And after a lot of playing around with mechanics, probably for 3 or 4 months of playtesting, I settled on easiest thing for players to understand and relate to is a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so what that allowed me to do is 1 to 10 is my difficulty scale, 11 is a fail, 12 is a critical fail. So basically the idea is that it's a 1 to 10 scale with 2 little sprinklings on the end, and the D12 allows that to be done perfectly. It runs from 1 to 10. If you roll an 11, 11 is only achievable with cyber enhancement. It's like superhuman. And 12 is just not happening. 12 is a complete and utter screw up. So the D12 was just perfect for that. And the moment that I swapped out trying to force this system to work on D10s to 12s and gave it back to my playtest group, everyone was like, yes, straight away. this is what it's missing. And I was really happy because I've wanted to liberate the D12 from its dusty box on the shelf for ages. And so it was really great to be able to bring that out. The D3s came in, originally it was using D12s and D6s, and D3s are only used for damage calculation with weapons. And we were playing around with, I was trying to generate more consistency in the rolls so that weapons were not quite so swingy. And we were using like D6 plus 1 with a cap. So it was like D6 plus 1, maximum 5. And it was like, this is really messy, and it really fights against what the rest of the system is doing, which is to be really quite smooth. Nice. And D3s just worked, right? So you know, 3D3 gives you a much tighter bandwidth than using a D10 or 2D6s. You know, you're looking at a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 9, and it allows you to tighten things up a little bit, and where things need a bit of a swing, we just do a simple plus 1. So sometimes weapons will use combinations of both dice and a modifier. You might have a 1d12 plus 1d3 plus 1, but between those two dice and small modifiers, I'm able to use quite a tight min-max point and work out nice averages and avoid needing hands full of dice. I don't think there's anything in the core book that requires more than 3d3 and 2d12. So a 5 dice set is basically what the game is based upon.
Nice. So it's not like playing orcs in 40k where you need a bucket.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Here's my bucket, and I'll just tip them all out. Yeah, exactly. And I'm a Tyranid player, and my Units dealers unfortunately do the same thing. So yeah, that happens.
Nids are the only
not at the moment though.
No, never
till we get a new codex.
I've always liked playing painting Tyranid miniatures. Just never liked. I always hated how shoehorned they felt into the lore, the fluff. I always love watching people that work at GW when you say fluff and they're like, oh, it's lore. For a period of time, like it was like GW was like, don't call it fluff, and I'm like, I love calling it fluff.
It's fluff. Fluff. Yeah. So yeah, no, it's nice, simple, and D12s just roll really nice. There's just something about them that just I can't explain it. But if you're a gamer, if you play RPGs and you own a D12, you'll know. I don't know anybody that doesn't roll a D12 and go, there's something nice about that dice. I just don't get to use it very often.
Yeah, D6s and D12s are my favorites. I've always liked D6s just because everybody understands them. And like your brain is really easy. Everything, so many games that we play have 6-sided dice in them. I've never liked the D10 just because it always evolves into percentile systems is kind of how it's always gone into. And the D12, it gives you a nice variety without going into too much variety, which I find is where you get with the D20. And as much as I love the Dungeon Crawl Classic stuff, they got the D24 and the D30, and I find all those amusing. But man, your I mean, a 1 to a 30 is huge, and your percentiles is just a ginormous range of oh shit to crazy shit.
I own a D13 as well. And I very nearly went down that road of, this is something I could do to be a bit more unique. I'd obviously have to sell a lot of D13s because people are not going to own them. But man, they roll so weird. I got a set from a manufacturer. I got like a 9, a 13, a 17, and a 19. And there was a moment when I was like, maybe I could do the 13... be, and I said, no, Shep, stop it. I gave myself a hard slap and walked away.
Yeah, if you're trying to do something, you gotta try to target what the players already have. Don't do like Fantasy Flight where you've got to buy special dice because they're using a D10, a D6, and whatever, but we're using our own faces. Or like Dungeon Crawl, hey, we're gonna do a D24 and a D16 or D18, 16 or 18, and then a D30. sometimes those are they're funny, but man, are they just a pain in the butt. Stick with one of the standardized dice, and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
D12
I mean,
doesn't get enough love.
yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, the system obviously in the book describes the D3 to be a D6, and that, the classic way of using a D6 is a D3. I have no doubt that most people won't go out and buy these crazy little kidney bean shaped dice, but there are some really fun D3s out there on the market.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of
Well,
funk up your game
and the
experience a
nice
little
thing
bit.
with the D3 is you can still use a D12. You just 1 through 3 is a 1, so
Yeah,
it works out. You still can use a D12. So technically, at most you need 5 D12s for your system.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You could do it that way.
And so somebody asked, how do you find using a one die system is it hampered by not giving you a bell curve or an average roll?
A one dice system. Okay, so first of all, the system uses 2d12 in a. So the system it works a little differently to a lot of systems. You basically, when you make a test, you test against your relevant statistic. Okay, um, skills in this game don't have any values applied to them. You're either skilled or you're not skilled in a given area. So you either possess a skill or you do not possess a skill. So what the skill is determines how many successes you need to work. So you roll 2d12 and you need to roll equal to or lower than your statistic. So let's say you're making a strength-based skill test, and your strength, it's actually brawn in the game, but I'm simplifying for people that don't play the game. And you've got a statistic of 6. Okay, you're going to roll 2 dice, 2d12s, and if you are skilled in the relevant skill, one of those 2 dice needs to be 6 or lower. If you are not skilled, both of those dice need to be
Cool.
6 or lower in order to succeed. If either of those 2 dice are a 12 and you fail, then it's a critical failure. Okay, so if you get both 2 failures and one of them or both of them is a 12, you get a critical failure. So skills drastically switch around what you can do, and you can be specialized in a skill, which is like being skilled +1, and it gives you a reroll on 1 dice. But characters will never have more than 2 specializations. So that's like what the area within the game that you choose to be a master at or attempt to be a master at, you get a specialization in as well. So the system balances itself quite nicely by having this acceptance that if you are unskilled, you're going to have a much harder time. And a number of skills within the game are also flagged as being advanced. So that it would be things like medicine or flying an aircraft. There are things that you could take a stab at them, like me taking a stab at, say, I don't know, pickpocketing somebody. Maybe I'll pull it off. But if I was to just jump behind the controls of an airplane and be told to land it with no guidance, the chance is pure luck, right? I would have no idea what anything did. So if you have an advanced skill, then basically things get. If you are not skilled and you have an advanced skill, you're basically going to fail. I mean, you can pass, but it's like a Hail Mary. So there are stages of success generated by how skilled in an area you are and how much training would be required in a given area if you were to become skilled in it. And so by those stages, you're able to create an interesting array of different requirements in order to succeed or not. It also, interestingly, makes character creation a really fine balancing act, because if you want to be the combat monster that many people want to be when they make and play sci-fi role-play games, then you are going to be severely hampered in other areas where generating successes in social or perceptive or intelligence-based tests are going to be incredibly hard because your success in all skill tests is determined specifically by your rank in any given statistic. And so there is, I think we made something like 200 and something characters during the playtest phase between me and the group, and there is no one build that comes remotely close to breaking the game. And what we also did in that is that each statistic has a second use during character creation. So you might read through everything and think, well, actually, if I put loads into dexterity, I'm better at firing a gun, and dexterity gives me some extra hit points. So that's got to be good, right? Extra health, and I'm better at gun, so I'm going to pull into that. But then you'll also find that your willpower actually gives you more resistance to, gives you more pressure, so resistance to the attrition of combat and fear. And your intelligence gives you, so each stat will later determine another area. So by robbing yourself of certain statistics to try and increase your odds in other areas, you actually rob yourself of more than just simply, you think, oh, I'll just not bother speaking to anybody, I'll do that whole, like, I'll put my social skills at 1 and my strength at 10 kind of vibe, which, you know, we've seen in every roleplay game in history.
Dump stat.
Yeah, exactly, right. It will you will be actively punished by the game for doing that. And the guidance in the book, because don't forget, I wrote this for me. The guidance in the book says if you've got a character, if you've got a player in your party that's doing this, they are the person that you force all the social tests on. Yeah? They are the first person that decides to power game you, you punish them. Yeah, you make them realize that that's just not how humanity works. Yeah, we all need to have a little bit of everything. So, yeah, I think, yeah, I'm not quite
That's
sure.
Good
if that
advice for a
GM
of any system. If you get somebody that is trying to min-max their character, consistently put their characters into situations where they're the weakest at. And as a player, like, I love getting the characters that have those weak spots and trying to figure, like, I've brought up a few times on streams in the past. One of my favorite characters ever was the D&D 3.5, and we literally just rolled straight down. What you roll goes into the stats as you go down, and I ended up with a 3 intelligence but an 18 charisma. So I played a sorcerer that couldn't speak, and we just figured out that nature just really liked him, and when he needed help, nature jumped in with the fireball or whatever. Like, and that character was just a blast to play because nothing made sense about it. But always getting stuck in situations where that character needed to use the intelligence, and it was funny because we had a good GM that would try to force that and would force the rest of the party to, oh god, someone has to be with Carnahan's character, otherwise we're gonna get boned because he's gonna have to use his intelligence and that character has none.
Exactly. I'm a big advocate for the idea that people that are like, I'm gonna build this way because this is like, I'm gonna breeze through everything, I'll massacre everybody, or I'll be able to just sneak past everybody. You know, this whole kind of like cheat my way through the game. That's what I kind of see as like role playing for kids. You know, like kids, like really young kids, and they get upset when they don't win. And you know, it's just like, if you want to play that way, that's cool, right? But for me, role playing should be about challenge. It should be about challenging the people at the table. And it's not about like sitting down and just, cool, you win, let's go home, let's go to the pub, we're done. Yeah, you've won. Like, it should be like, you should be facing situations that are challenging. You need to think your way out of them. And when you have to rely on the dice, there's no point in just going, well, what's the point in rolling? You know, like, you're a 1 in 30 chance of, like, this doesn't, role playing isn't about that for me. It's about creating challenge. And people should be challenged. Even somebody who is an expert in an area should experience a challenge. You know, you think about real life. Every time a pilot, oh right, we've got autopilot on a lot of stuff, but when you fly a plane, right, it's not an easy thing. It requires great skill. You have to have
Yeah.
concentration, and when something goes wrong, you need to know how to solve it. You're a surgeon. You don't just go, oh, I'll just put my feet up and I'll just do it with one hand. Like it requires skill. It's challenging. You never know what happens when you use that scalpel, and role playing should achieve that. And so I believe actively slapping people in the face when they try to power game you in that way is completely viable, and I strongly enforce people do that at every opportunity.
Yeah, it's a blast, and sometimes it's fun because you'll get the power gamer that's not been challenged, and then they're like, "Oh, it's not how the game goes." And I'm like, "It's exactly how the game goes."
Yeah, you're like, I haven't been
have
able
you
to
not
fire
done
my
that once?
weapon once this game. I'm like, yeah, and you're not going to keep firing it because you've brought an armory with you. Yeah, this entire scenario, you got to talk your way out of this. What's your social skills? Oh, tough luck, you know. And I think I think that's great. You know, people. And I'm not also advocating that people have to just kind of like level out all their stats to be in the middle. You know,
No,
people
no.
should
Some min maxing
create
can be a
create
blast.
yeah, absolutely. But creating a character whose statistics represent their character are really important, rather than just trying to work out which thing you think you're going to do the most of in the game and make
Yeah.
yourself be good at it. This sucks.
Exactly, and then getting characters. You may have the combat Gumby who's not good at the social skills, but hopefully somebody else at the table has made the guy that's mediocre at combat and great at the social things, and they can work together as a team. I tell people one of the things we do when we're trying to work with like at-risk teens is around the world we're pretty bad at teaching critical thinking, social skills, communication, problem solving, all things that you sit down at a good RPG, sitting down at that table, you should be doing every single one of those, and not allowing players to just min max and bowl through everything and go I win. Is great because you put those kids, you put your players, any whether they're adults or kids or whatever, you put them into those situations where they now have to think of, hey, how do we work together? How do we solve this puzzle? Every time I punch this thing, it gets more powerful. Well, that's all I know how to do is punch. Well, what else? Who else at the table is there that can do something besides punch? Somebody said one of their favorite characters had 3 constitution. Getting over weakness is just as much fun as throwing your strengths around. And absolutely, I love being able to do that.
Yeah.
Love finding those things. So one of the things I've always hated about so many systems is just because you're fast, you go first in combat. How does like initiative type systems work in your game?
Yeah. So this is one of those areas where building in one certain area can negate something else. So in the Gaia Complex, initiative in combat is based more on a character's perception than it is on their physical speed. So if you decide to pool all your points into reflexes, it's very traditional for RPGs where the statistic that determines how good you are with a weapon is usually the same thing that determines how good you are at acting quickly. And therefore, it's a double whammy of awesomeness, right? It's just normal for that to happen. And
I'm the rogue. I'm great with my knives or my bow. I go first.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't really do that. So we are much more focused on mental wit, going quicker in combat. You might be a great shot, but if you don't perceive your surroundings accurately, you don't see what's happening, then you won't be the first person to take action. And I actually think that is a more realistic way of looking at combat situations. Combat analysis, for a soldier to be faced with a situation, if that soldier bases their reactions on their dexterity, their first reaction might be charge, but that's often not the right thing to do. You need to perceive your environment, You need to work out where the threats are, and then you need to act accordingly. So yeah, initiative is based largely on mental wit and perception, and I think that's I think it works really well. Playtesters were really happy with that setup, and yeah, and it's great, and it just means that those characters that are not hugely combat orientated have the option to get the hell out of the way or take a more defensive stance on a situation before the bullets start flying. And traditionally, in a lot of role play games, and that I've played and GM'd in the past, you know, the intelligent characters get slaughtered first because they're the last to act in combat, and I don't like that. So we changed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I was flipping through the rules, and I saw that you had done that in such a different way, and I really like that because I kind of harp on that. It's one of the things industry wide that we've been really lazy on. I've always praised the old classic Deadlands because just because you're fast didn't mean you went first. You could get more actions, but you know, I got one action, this guy's got four actions. You draw out of a deck of cards. Ace of spades goes first, two of clubs goes last. And I remember playing one time, I was like, I've got five actions, which is the most you could get. It was crazy. And I drew all twos and threes. Everybody went before me. The bad guys, everybody on the team, and I'm just laying there like bloodied, like I'm about to die. And then I unload, and you know I killed everybody. But just because I was fast didn't mean I went first. And I little moments like that have always stuck with me, and I've always been frustrated. You know, playing systems like, oh, my initiative is 97 on a d20. Oh, I got this plus and this plus, and I got this, and I got to double it because of this. And I'm like, oh, so frustrating. So when I saw that in your system, I really wanted you to touch on that because I genuinely like that, and it so few systems do anything really different in doing their initiative because almost all of them are speed based. Like, oh well, you got fast reflexes, so therefore, well, no, if you don't see what's going on, I don't care how fast you are. They get a drop on you. They get
Yeah.
a drop on you.
And there are a couple of like cybernetic enhancements which will help with it. They're like specific military spec. One is if you've got a neural what we call neural frame, which is a cybernetic brain enhancement. There's a one of the companies, Dire Arms, a big arms manufacturer. There's a I can't remember what we call it, but there's basically a combat analysis software that you can get that does the whole kind of RoboCop thing. It goes up, beep, 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 picks out
Yeah.
your targets, works out what's the biggest threat. They'll give you a bit of an initiative boost, and I think a couple of the exoskeletons will as well. But we're talking about tech here, which costs like more than your month's rent and the most expensive firearm. Stuff that starting characters are not going to be touching with a barge pole, and you know, and they've been designed to be the whole kind of like these are the kind of like upper echelon of combat technology that everybody aspires to get their hands on and probably won't ever get their hands on. But you know, depending on how generous you are as a GM, maybe one day. And but yeah, generally speaking, we run it on to if you're a keen mind, you are just as likely to do well in combat in terms of the order of things as you are if you are a hardened soldier. What we also do to try and make that initiative process a little smoother, we recommend in the book, and it is kind of an optional thing, that if you're dealing with larger numbers of NPCs or various groups of NPCs, that you do a single initiative test for each group rather than for each NPC. So you just be kind of like within the order of the players, the NPCs, the gang will act here rather than being an individual thing. Find it a lot smoother than doing like, right, it's you, then an NPC, then it's you, then it's this NPC, then it's you, then it's just much easier to kind of make them all just fit in a little block somewhere. So
Yeah.
Keeps things tidy. We work it that way.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, and then you're kind of back on the quickly on the initiative thing is going back onto the cognitive thing is so few people in real life have actually been in combat in the military, whether it be British military, American military, Australian, whatever. infantry, they're trained to react to contact. So once you've reacted to contact, you need that cognitive ability to really continue you through. Just because you've reacted to contact, you need to be more than a mobile sandbag. You've got to think your way out of the situations. Just because you're a good shot doesn't mean you can get in position to get that good shot. So, again, hats off to you. You've done so many things that I think are really good to break people out of kind of generic RPGing. Using D12s, having the backup die of the D3. I don't really call it. Yeah, it's a good choice on the D3 because it balances out, like you're saying, it balances out your weapons, but it's still. If people don't have D3s, they can use a D12 or even a D6, and then great breaking out of the norms. A good way to do initiative. Hats off to doing good art, really cool stories, and good world building. So we've got some people that didn't know about the game before jumping in here, and hopefully they'll go back your Kickstarter. And they can get the expansion and the core rules. Even if you just back it at a normal level, I suggest people go pick this game up. It is a really cool. The art is great, the setting is cool, and some really smart mechanics. And from somebody that's worked in the industry, and I like to say, you've learned from the industry, and you've not done things the lazy way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. I thank you very much for your kind words. It's very humbling to hear people saying lovely things about something that you've created. It means an awful lot. But yeah, please do check it out. Again, there's a free quick start and drive through. I think it's about 50 pages long. There's a lot of art in there. There's a good bit of lore and a bit of fiction, so you can get a feel for what we've created. The majority of the rule system is in there, with the exception of a few of the sort of optional extras to combat, like bleeding and things for people that want a bit more crunch. We have a number of little things that are tagged as optional in the book. We specifically say, here's your core rules, and here are little things if you've got a group of people at the table that want a bit more meat. Here they are. And so yeah, please do that. We also have on drive through, you'll see there are 3 releases on there for $1 each, I think they are, which are called Data Seeds Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. Each of those contain 2 or 3 additional of our mini adventure ideas and a couple of extra NPCs. And so if you've got the quick start, you don't have the core book, and you want more ideas and scenarios, there's some content there. If you have the core book and you want to flesh it out, there's another best part of 12 scenarios that are available on there as well. And if you don't want to have to wait for the delivery of this next Kickstarter campaign, digital copies of the core book are out there as well. You can get a PDF on drive through and stuff like that already. So yeah.
Nice. Now, super excited to get to see people play this more. We need to see if we can get a couple copies into the library so that we can share them with people. And
Definitely.
before we wrap up, so normally we do player character confessionals, and everybody is getting to know those. But you have a GM confessional that you're going to do. So on the GM confessional, I just want you to tell us the system and then kind of give us a little preface of the situation before you really go into the full confessional.
Sure. Well, I asked about doing the GM one because I probably 90% of my role playing experience since being a teenager has been GMing. I do love playing, but people are like, "Oh, we really want to play this. Would you run it for us?" And I struggle to say no because, as you might have noticed listening in this interview, I'm good at talking a lot, so I end up being the person that kind of spins the story. So, but the thing that stands out to me about being well, let's be honest, it's a time when I basically wiped out every single player at the table. And I'm usually not quite that brutal, but they were asking for it. It was actually Slay Industries' first edition game, and it was quite a long time ago, and we'd been playing a campaign for maybe 8 or 9 months, same characters for just ages. And I mean, I will work to the assumption that some people are aware of Slay Industries, but if you're not, basically, it's a dark, very, very dark dystopian world where things like mass murder and contract killing is televised, cannibalism is commonplace, and everybody lives in a city that's been walled off from what's outside. In the city is horrific and brutal. Outside the city doesn't bear worth thinking about. So you play operatives. You play a group of people that are in the employment of Slay Industries, who are basically run this city. They pretty much own the world, would be the best way to describe it. Think of yourselves as less of the police force, more as FBI agents. In a sci-fi world, plated armor. Some of you are giant hulking aliens. You're not all human. It's very crazy and very, 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 very violent. There were. This was actually an investigation sort of scenario that was not really supposed to spiral into combat, which is combat was something that had been an awful lot of during the campaign, and the idea was to have a bit of a twist on that. It was kind of an X-Files vibe that I was going for, but they just refused to take any of the breadcrumbs. Like, no matter where they were looking for the next fight, to the point that one of the players literally actively attacked every NPC that was there to help the players along the way. And I was just getting to the point where it's like, you're just spoiling for a fight. That's my character. That's what I do. I rip things apart. And I'm like, okay, fine. So the trail led to a cannibal farm just outside of the main wall, or in the area that they call the cannibal sectors. Okay, and out there, cannibalism is commonplace, and people live without the technology. It's very brutal. It's that kind of like Hills Have Eyes kind of vibe. And so as they get into the farm, in order to make it clear that there are cannibals in Slay Industries are renowned for keeping carnivorous pigs as pets. And these are giant, they're like somewhere between a pig and a hippo. They're absolutely massive, and they will eat anything. They just devour things. And you don't go near them, right? You just don't go near them. So there was this big pen, like a pit, with like 4 or 5 carnivorous pigs in it, and remains. And the idea of putting this in the scene was so that people would come up to it and go, okay, definitely cannibal activity. Let us be quiet, stealthy. Let's investigate. Let's find. They were looking for a missing person. Okay, and the trails had led them to this farm, and it's kind of fairly obvious that this person had been eaten. But the idea was that they would follow it. They would find evidence, and they'd get out. So the same NPC the same PC who had decided to attack everybody along the route suddenly decided that the presence of the carnivorous pigs and the remains in there were clearly a very, very, very important clue. And that the only way they were going to solve this scenario was to get themselves down in the pit with the carnivorous pigs to extract the remains that were down there. That clearly must be the person that they were looking for. I had no intention of the players tangling with the pigs at all. They were supposed to see them, click that they were cannibals about, and move on. So anyway, this character rappels down into the pit, drastically fails the rolls to do so, falls, lands, injures themselves, and very quickly, despite trying to protect themselves, is devoured limb from limb by carnivorous pigs. The dice rolls were hilarious. It was like, if I can roll every single one possible, and the pigs are just like, yeah, critical damage, literally devoured him. Now, this would have been bad enough because the player was like pretty miffed that he'd fudged every dice roll and made a stupid mistake and lost the character that he'd been building for like 9 months. That the 2 of the 3 other players at the table were playing an alien called a Shakhtar. Now, if you know Slay Industries, you know what they are, but they're effectively big, hulking, red guy. Originally, you would be fair to say they were a little bit like Predator, okay? But they're very honourable. Think of them as like space samurais, okay? They're all about honour. And the most important thing to a Shakhtar is the protection of their allies. And so, without any consideration for their well-being. Both Shakhtars flew themselves over the edge into the pit, and worse. And I was like, look, I'm going to give you either let the dice decide, right? I'm not just going to say it, right, that's it, you're all screwed. And they couldn't hit this 12-foot pig for love nor money. Well, it just tusked one of them to death. I think one of them was beheaded. It was a bloodbath. And there was one player left at the table, and there was a brief discussion between them as to whether he was just going to leg it, and then they would make new characters, and he would kind of create a side story arc about him escaping with his life, and his team had been torn apart, and he goes to ways and recruits some newbies and tries to, there'd be one of them be the super. He just decided, no, I'm just going to follow them in and see if I can take one out in the way. So he threw himself over as well, and didn't even manage to scratch one of the pigs, and I think he was actually killed by the baby pig in the end, which was just rubbing salt in the wound. So I managed to wipe out 4 heavily armed, well played, experienced characters through what was supposed to simply be a kind of a small clue that there might be some combat or something worth sneaking by in the future. There was not supposed to be no interaction with this, let's call it a landscape element. And they managed to they managed to kill themselves on a pit of carnivorous pigs. So that was quite amusing. And then I think we went to the pub and they complained over a couple of beers for about 3 hours. And then interestingly, that was I think they were so sour that we didn't play Slay Industries for about 6 months again afterwards. I think we moved on to Vampire the Dark Ages for a little bit of a twist, and that ended up just as brutally. And then we went back to Slay Industries for some more light-hearted fun.
Nice, that's awesome. I love that, and it's always nice to have another game system on deck. I always liked having the small short games that have been made over the years. I like to call palate cleansers. Teenagers from Outer Space, Mike Pondsmith game is one that I've used as a palate cleanser between something where the game brutally ends and be like, okay, before we start something else, let's play something that no one's gonna care about. Like, we're just going to play to have some fun till we move on to the next thing where you're going to be upset when your character dies.
Absolutely. I think my Kids on Bikes has become my go-to for that.
Kids
over
on
the
Bikes
last
is
couple of years.
Great modern
That's a great,
one.
can we just do a one-shot, or can we just do something like we've got a whole weekend free, like a couple of sessions? And I'm like, yeah, this is the perfect, it's like 30 seconds to make a character, and you can just, we'll just play through Stranger Things, right? You can just do anything with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. It's great to have those little systems.
Yeah, love. I actually really love Kids on Bikes, and it is a great one-shot to medium length game that out there. And then there's been a bunch of good stuff to be added onto Kids on Bikes, and a lot of Kids on Bikes clones as well.
Yes.
So. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We did get somebody that said they want you to come and run a game for the library. We usually invite people on, but when we get somebody that's actually in chat watching on live, that's literally is run a game for us, run a game for us, run a game for us. So.
I'm sure we can arrange something. Something.
Especially, and if you want to run your own game, awesome. If you want to run something else, also awesome. But definitely want to see Gaia Complex run, and sounds like you'd be a hoot as a GM as well. So if we can arrange that, we'll definitely do that.
Yeah. I think we should be either run the Gaia Complex, or I run West End Games' second revised edition of Star Wars. I think one of those two has got to happen. And I'm very up for either. I'll let you guys decide.
I almost always at any convention we go to, I end up running at least one game of D6 Star Wars, and I basically run the exact same game every time, the same start and the same key points along the way, and it never ever goes the same. It's hilarious because it's like the same handful of points, and I had a group of people that never made it out of the starting bar, and they all died in the starting bar. It was great. It was like, wow, you guys, We played for 3 hours, and you guys didn't even make it out of the starting bar, and you all died. Like, how did this happen? This is that's amazing. But thanks for coming on. If you stick around, I got some things I'd like to talk to you. But for everybody tuning in at home, we've been on for just a little over 2 hours, so it's
Yeah, sorry.
almost
I
9:30
have a tendency
p.m.
to talk a lot.
No, we've gotten a lot of interaction. People loved it. Looks like you gotten 2 new Kickstarter pledges since you've been on here, so
Thank you
excited
so
about
much.
that. And no, it's a good game. And again, I think you've done a great job with it. Nailed the art. You've nailed a bunch of little things that the industry's kind of gotten lazy about. Well, the indie side is hit or miss on the art. You did talk on how everybody is finally realizing that art is how you sell a game. Because if a game doesn't look good, people won't pick it up. But for everybody out there, thanks for tuning into the library, and check out Gaia Complex. Check out all the awesome things that our guest here has done with Slay Industries, with Modifius, with his own projects. Just hats off to all the awesome things that you've done over the years, and just keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you.
and
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we'll have news and Kickstarters. Wednesday we'll be doing Deadlands again, and then next week we have an artist on. So all the awesome things that we talked about today with about artists and freelancers and everything, we actually get to go more in depth next week with an artist. So tune in next week, next Sunday, for sitting down with somebody that does art in the game industry. And until then, the library's closed.